Right now, while you're watching this video, the world's richest person is making more money per second than most people earn in a month. But here's what nobody wants to talk about. Behind almost every massive fortune in history, there's a trail of secrets, scandals, and stories that never made it into the history books. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the darkest chapters of extreme wealth, and trust me, what you're about to discover will change how you see billionaires forever. Let's start with today's tech giants. We're living in an era where a handful of individuals control more wealth than entire countries. But recent years have brought some seriously troubling allegations to light. Reports have surfaced about labor conditions in factories producing the devices we use every day, with workers allegedly facing exhausting hours and minimal pay. There's been intense speculation about how these fortunes are structured, with billions reportedly flowing through complex offshore networks. Investigative journalists have claimed that some of the world's wealthiest individuals pay less in taxes than average workers, using legal loopholes that most people don't even know exist. The gap between public image and private reality keeps growing wider, and the more you dig, the more uncomfortable questions start emerging. What really happens behind those sleek corporate presentations and carefully managed public appearances? But modern controversies are nothing compared to what came before. Travel back to the late 80s in Colombia, and you'll find wealth built on something far more sinister. Pablo Escobar wasn't just a drug lord, he was running an empire that left thousands dead in its wake. The man was pulling in $420 million every single week, but that money was drenched in blood. Entire neighborhoods in Medellin lived in terror. Judges, journalists, politicians, anyone who stood in his way faced a simple choice: accept the bribe or face the consequences. And those consequences were brutal. Reports suggest that Escobar was responsible for the demise of over 4,000 people during his reign. He bombed a commercial airliner, killing 110 innocent passengers just to target one person. His wealth came with a body count that most people can't even comprehend. But here's the truly disturbing part. Rumors have persisted for decades about hidden stashes of cash that were never recovered. Some estimate that billions are still buried somewhere in the Colombian countryside or hidden in secret locations across South America. Treasure hunters and conspiracy theorists have spent years searching, and every few years, stories surface about mysterious discoveries. Was all of Escobar's fortune really accounted for, or is there still blood money waiting to be found? The pattern of violence and wealth continues as we move to the Soviet Union in the 1940s. Joseph Stalin technically had almost no personal wealth on paper, but that's because he owned something far more valuable: complete control over millions of lives. The true cost of Stalin's power is almost impossible to calculate. Historians estimate that between 20 and 30 million people perished under his rule, through forced famines, executions, or the gulags. These weren't just numbers. These were real people. Entire families wiped out for the slightest perceived threat to Stalin's authority. Tell a joke about the wrong person, you're gone. Question a policy, your whole family disappears. The paranoia was so intense that when Stalin suffered his fatal stroke, his guards waited 12 hours before calling a doctor, terrified he might punish them for acting without orders. But here's what's rarely discussed. There have been persistent rumors about secret gold reserves and stolen art collections hidden during Stalin's era. When Nazi Germany invaded, the Soviets allegedly moved massive amounts of wealth eastward, and not all of it was accounted for after the war ended. Some researchers claim that hidden vaults and secret storage facilities might still exist, containing treasures worth billions. The Soviet state had access to resources from across 1/6 of the world's land area, and the complete inventory of what Stalin controlled has never been fully documented. Speaking of the Nazis, let's talk about another dictator whose wealth was built on atrocities. Adolf Hitler went from being a struggling artist sleeping in hostels to controlling most of Europe, and the methods he used were beyond comprehension. But what's often overlooked is how he personally profited from his position of power. Hitler didn't just seize political control, he turned himself into a brand. He copyrighted his own image and collected royalties every single time a postage stamp with his face was sold. He copyrighted his speeches, so newspapers had to pay him to print them. His book became mandatory reading, with the government purchasing millions of copies using taxpayer money. By the end of his rule, he'd accumulated personal wealth worth hundreds of millions in today's currency, all while millions suffered under his regime. The true scale of Nazi looting has never been fully calculated. Art collections stolen from families across Europe, gold taken from banks, resources stripped from occupied territories, it all added up to trillions. And here's where it gets really dark. Much of this stolen wealth was never recovered. There are ongoing investigations into Nazi gold that allegedly ended up in Swiss bank accounts. Rumors persist about treasure trains hidden in mountain tunnels and stolen art still hanging in private collections under false provenance. Some families are still fighting legal battles to recover what was taken from their ancestors over 80 years ago. The Nazi regime didn't just cause unfathomable human suffering, it created a black market in stolen goods that persists to this day. But before dictators weaponized politics for profit, there were businessmen who built empires through ruthlessness disguised as innovation. Henry Ford revolutionized manufacturing and created the middle class, but the story isn't as clean as history classes make it seem. Ford was known for his controversial views, publishing a newspaper that spread deeply problematic content for years. His security forces allegedly used violence against workers trying to organize for better conditions. The Battle of the Overpass in 1937 saw Ford's security team brutally attack Union organizers, leaving several hospitalized. Ford fought against unions tooth and nail, only giving in when he absolutely had to. There were also serious questions about his business dealings with certain governments during World War II. His company's operations in Germany continued producing military vehicles even after America entered the war, and historians have debated the extent of Ford's knowledge and involvement. The man who invented the 40-hour work week and raised wages also ran an operation that some workers described as oppressive and controlling. Ford even created a department that investigated employees' personal lives to ensure they were living according to his moral standards. Then we have the original robber barons, and trust me, that nickname was earned. John D. Rockefeller didn't become America's first billionaire through fair competition. He crushed his rivals systematically. Standard Oil would secretly buy up competing refineries, then coordinate price wars to drive remaining competitors into bankruptcy. They'd negotiate exclusive deals with railroads to get discounts while their competitors paid higher rates. If that didn't work, there were allegations of sabotage, espionage, and intimidation. Workers who tried to organize faced retaliation. The conditions in early oil refineries were dangerous, with accidents causing injuries and fatalities that barely made the news. Rockefeller's partner, Henry Flagler, once said their company's success came from their willingness to do things their competitors weren't willing to do, and that should tell you everything. When the government finally broke up Standard Oil as an illegal monopoly in 1911, Rockefeller actually got richer because he owned shares in all the new companies. The system was so rigged that even a judicial punishment made him wealthier. Andrew Carnegie's steel empire had similar issues. The Homestead Strike of 1892 turned deadly when Carnegie's partner Henry Clay Frick hired private security forces to break up the strike. Armed guards faced off against workers, resulting in a violent battle that left over a dozen people dead. Carnegie was conveniently in Scotland during this incident, maintaining his public image as a philanthropist while his company used lethal force against its own workers. These men gave away millions to charity later in life, but those fortunes were built on practices that would be considered unacceptable today.